Welcome back. This is our last session on just the nervous system proper, and we're going to talk about the organization, because we've talked about how cells communicate along their lengths, or how neurons communicate along their lengths, as well as between neurons. And so now we're going to just talk about how they're put together in a very general way in the nervous system. So we're going to talk about how the nervous system is organized. And you can think of it as having kind of three parts, where we're going to have to get information into the nervous system, and in a minute we'll talk about what kinds of information that is. That is going to be that's going to be part of the peripheral nervous system, because it's going to be mostly outside of the brain and spinal cord. And that's going to be called the afferent portion of the nervous system. I always remember afferent being coming into, and it starts with A, so that's kind of the first part of the nervous system. So that's what's shown in red here, where we have a touch receptor, and that they're sensing this pin in the skin and sending that signal into the spinal cord. So the afferent part of the nervous system is going to feed into the central nervous system. The central nervous system, spinal cord or brain, is where the integration of the information is going to occur. So it's going to be where the decision is going to be made about what to do about this stimulus. Then we're going to have the efferent portion of the nervous system, which is going to sit mostly in the peripheral nervous system, where it's causing the effect. So we've getting sensory information about what's happening, the decisions made in the central nervous system about what to do with it. Now we need to create or cause the response. That's going to be the efferent part. It starts with E. Later in the alphabet, it's the second part coming out to cause the effect and moving away from the central nervous system. So we're going to have several lectures or sessions on the senses, but we're just going to briefly mention what kind of sensory input we're talking about. And the first thing I'm going to talk about are not a surprise. It's going to be vision, hearing, taste, your sense of balance, your sense of smell. So those are certainly types of sensory information that are coming in through these afferent systems. Another one is somatosensation, which are going to be based in the body. That's why it's somato. So these are going to be things like touch and pain and temperature that are in the skin, as well as other organs. And then also, in part of somatosensation is proprioception, which is how you can know where your body is in space without necessarily using your eyes. So it's sensing stretch in your muscles or in your tendons or in your joints that can tell you where your body is in space. So proprioception is part of somatosensation. It's part of the sensation that occurs in your body, apart from your special senses that are in your head. Then the other stimuli that we also should consider, and that we'll be talking about throughout the rest of the course, are our visceral stimuli, things that are necessary to maintain proper homeostasis. So knowing the pH of the blood, or the oxygen content of the blood, things like that, that are the nervous system is also going to monitor and respond to. So we've talked about the afferent systems coming in. Then we'll talk a little bit more in the future about the integration in the central nervous system. But now we're going to move to talking about the efferent branches of the nervous system. We have the somatic nervous system, which is going to control skeletal muscle. And then we have the autonomic nervous system that's going to control smooth muscle and many other organs of the body. And the autonomic nervous system, which you probably are familiar with, can be divided into the sympathetic and parasympathetic portions. And it's also going to work in tandem and work with the enteric nervous system, which is going to be very important in the GI tract. So we're not going to talk too much about the enteric nervous system. We're going to briefly talk about the actual circuitry of these efferent parts of the nervous system. And let's start at the bottom of the slide where the somatic nervous system that's controlling skeletal muscle is going to have a single neuron that's going to be sitting in the central nervous system and send its axon out to the muscle. That axon is going to release as its neurotransmitter acetylcholine, and it's going to bind nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on the skeletal muscle. And we'll be talking much more about that when we talk about the somatic nervous system and skeletal muscle. The autonomic nervous system uses two neurons in series, and that's what's shown in this diagram, where the first neuron is sitting in the central nervous system, and then it synapses with a second neuron that then leads to the tissue or the organ. For the parasympathetic nervous system, the first neuron is going to release acetylcholine, and then the second neuron is going to bind that acetylcholine with nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. Then the second neuron is also going to release acetylcholine, but then the organ that it's synapsing with is going to bind that acetylcholine using muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. In the sympathetic portion of the autonomic nervous system, again, we're going to have acetylcholine and nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. So I remember this, that both the autonomic neurons and the somatic neurons, at least the first neuron for the autonomic neurons and the somatic neurons, they all three release acetylcholine and then bind nicotinic acetylcholine receptors. It's just in the autonomic, the second neuron of the autonomic system where things change. So we said already for the parasympathetic system, it's acetylcholine and muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. In the sympathetic nervous system, we're releasing mostly norepinephrine or noradrenaline and then binding adrenergic receptors on the organs. And then also in the sympathetic nervous system, we have a special case where we have the adrenal gland. So it is the first sympathetic neuron in the series is synapsing with cells in the adrenal gland medulla and causing them to release epinephrine as an endocrine hormone into the blood. And then epinephrine will bind to, again, adrenergic receptors in the organ. So it's acting very similarly to just a normal synapse, except that the epinephrine is being released into the blood, but it's still going to bind adrenergic receptors in a similar way to norepinephrine. So really, the only reason why I'm concerned about this is just for you understanding this is because we're going to come back to these systems over and over again when we talk about the nervous system control of the organs. So we're going to finish out this just by reminding you about what the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems do in terms of controlling organs. And this figure here is just meant to show you that the red lines are the sympathetic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system, and the blue lines are the opposite system. The point is just that many organs are innervated by both systems. And the reason behind that is so that we can have exquisite control over the activation of these organs. So you probably know that the sympathetic nervous system, we think of it being more active when you're doing flight or fright, when you are running from a bear and you're super afraid, and so you're going to increase your heart rate and do all sorts of things that are going to help you get away from that bear, and then you're going to shut down systems or suppress systems like the digestive tract that are not helping you get away from the bear, that you're trying to conserve your resources so that you can use all of them to try to get away from the situation. And so then you have the parasympathetic system, which is going to be more active during times of rest and digestion. So your heart rate will be slower and your digestive system will be active. Very often, you're not going to have a situation where one system's completely going full tilt and one's shut down. It's always going to be a balance where both systems are somewhat active. It's just a matter of which one is more active than the other. And the whole point of it is fine control. So you can think of driving a car or maybe riding a bicycle. If you drive a car, you could drive it with only the gas pedal. You'd have to let off the gas for a long time and coast to say you wanted to stop, but you could get around somewhat well. However, having a gas pedal and a brake, having the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system gives you exquisite control of where you put that car. And that's the same thing with having these two nervous systems that are both innervating many organs and giving you exquisite control about how active they are at any one given time. And so we'll be referring to these many times when we talk about the control of other organs. So we've talked about just the organization of the nervous system, where we're going to have the central nervous system that's going to integrate, the peripheral nervous system that's going to send in the sensory information and is going to send out the directive of what needs to happen in response to the sensory system. So I didn't mention this explicitly, but what this means is it's a reflex arc of the sensory information coming in, the integration of what should happen, and then the control and the signal of what to do and giving output to the effectors via the efferent pathways of the nervous system. And then we talked about how we've got many different efferent portions of the peripheral nervous system: somatic, skeletal muscle, and autonomic for the other organs, where we're going to have sympathetic and parasympathetic acting reciprocally and in opposition, and that the enteric division is going to be in the gut, and it can be modulated by, more specifically, the parasympathetic nervous system, or usually the parasympathetic nervous system.